So the question is, what was my inspiration for making the film? And there were two things, actually. The first was that I had directed a fiction film called On the Outs, which was a film about girls in juvenile jail. But it was fiction, but I based the characters on real girls that I was meeting in juvenile jails around the country. And at the time, and still, young women were the fastest growing prison population in the nation, and I was really curious to find out why. I spent a lot of time with these kids, and I really kind of grew to care about many of them deeply, and I remember approaching one of them and saying, gosh, Kalia, it must be so horrible to be in jail at age 12, and you could be out in the world, and she said to me, well, it's 3 hots and a cot, meaning here I eat. And I was so stunned by that, and she was not unique. Every single kid that I met in juvenile jail had at some point or another experienced really crushing hunger. And so that really got me thinking about the connection between hunger, food insecurity, and behaviors and actions that we pathologize and ultimately penalize in our society. So that was sort of brewing, and I was mentoring a girl that I had met, homework help and stuff like that. She lived in a shelter in East Harlem. Her mom was quite sick and wasn't really able to take care of the family well, and I was able to help her get into a special school for kids with learning disabilities, and I was patting myself on the back and feeling really good about it, and then I got a call from the principal that Sabrina was literally foraging in the trash for food, and she was going hungry. Her family didn't have the means to provide her with lunch. This was not a public school, so she was not entitled to a free lunch at school. And the effects on her life were devastating. She would either sleep all day, she couldn't focus, she had major social problems, she would either be aggressive or exhausted. And as someone who, get me an hour before lunch if I'm hungry, just get out of my way. Like, you can't, and this was her every day. And I was just so heartbroken, and I would feed her as much as I could, and then I would wake up the next morning and think, she's hungry again. And so I started to get very disillusioned, because my husband, who is actually in the film, is Tom Colicchio, and he's a chef who's been raising millions of dollars for hunger relief, as have many chefs all around the country, and many here in Minnesota and Minneapolis. And the amount of money, they've never raised more money, and there's never been more hunger. So clearly all the charity in the world, as well-intentioned as it is not fixing the problem. So the frustration of all those things coming together, and the personal sadness and pain I was feeling about kids that I knew, just, that's a long answer, sorry. The question was, do we know how many people go hungry with disabilities? I can only imagine that the numbers are pretty bad, because people are going hungry from every demographic group that I've met, except for maybe the 1%. I think they're probably doing okay. But the truth is, I don't know the answer to that, and I would like to find out. One thing that we found was that groups of people who have access to social services sometimes are doing better than the larger population, just because they are in the pathway of people who can help them. But that was also a big impediment sometimes to getting our characters. For example, we really wanted to include senior hunger, which is a massive problem and a very expensive problem, because it hastens medical problems and every possible issue for the elder community. But to reach people was very difficult, because we typically reached people through the organizations that provide services. So once you met somebody who was already getting services or getting help, they were usually out of the danger zone. And what was really hard was to find the people who were isolated for various reasons, and we know that many, many millions of housebound elderly, certainly people with disabilities, are in that position, but finding them and getting to them was very hard. And also finding people from the middle class and working people who experience hunger and food insecurity was really, really hard, because there's a huge stigma. And about 5 more minutes into the film, you were going to meet a gentleman, Deputy Applehands, who was the police marshal in Colburn, Colorado. He's their sole police marshal. He's a civil servant, and he can only get through the month feeding his family by going to the food pantry that Pastor Bob runs. And that's his only way to do it. So getting him to speak on camera about it, his shame was very profound, and he said, I find it humiliating, and then he said, well, I don't want to say that it's humiliating, but it's very grounding. But he was ashamed, and for him to actually talk about it was, I thought, incredibly courageous. His salary was too much for food stamps, and that's why he was availing himself of the church food pantry. And actually, it's highly unlikely that he even went to try to get food stamps, because in that particular community, Rosie's mother says she went, and it was a real struggle for her to bring herself to go. There's another character you were going to meet, you still will meet, I hope, who is a rancher in the same community. And he was very clear with us. He would never take a government handout as long as he lived. But as a consequence of the economy, he was working 2 jobs. His wife was an office manager working an hour away. He was a rancher and then the school janitor at night, and they couldn't put enough food on the table. So his kids were eating dinner every night, and Pastor Bob ran a kids' cafe, which was basically free meals. But because it came from the church, somehow it didn't feel like charity to him, and he was willing to accept it. I think many of them are grappling with what we're grappling with. However, they understand that most industrialized nations provide a greater safety net than we do. They just do. They are, I don't know why we have sort of a very strong independent streak. The myth of self-sufficiency is incredibly important to Americans, or the theme of it. And you can debate whether you're pro this or not, but many industrialized nations provide a safety net that is adequate to, if you're going to feed people with supplemental nutrition programs, they actually make those supplemental nutrition programs equal to the problem, as opposed to just short. Our food stamp program is calculated, the calories that we provide is calculated based on the minimum calories for survival. So when you think about the minimum calories for survival, let's just say you need, I don't know, a healthy adult, 2,000 calories, I don't know, but maybe it's 2,000 calories. So then they say, well, what's the cheapest way using the building blocks of a diet? So dry beans, lard, flour. I don't know about you, but I'm a working mother. I don't have time to start from super duper scratch and build the basic, and that's how they calculate. So if you're using those ingredients, the food stamp allotment will get you through the month. If you're like most people in the world and you need to put real food on the table in something less than 4 hours of cooking and whatever, it's not adequate. So I don't know, does that answer the question? Also, other nations are taking far more sort of progressive approaches to how to fix poverty. And poverty is viewed in this nation as one of those intractable things we'll never really get rid of. It just is. That's for some reason that people accept that. But the truth is that you look at an example like Brazil, they have, since 2003, they have halved the number of people living in poverty in their rural areas, halved. They cut it in half, and they did it by starting by fixing hunger. So by feeding people and giving them the means to feed themselves through seeds and education and a barter system where they can then grow stuff, and they get government seed and education. They can then, anything they grow is theirs to sell on the market and to barter, which ends up stimulating local economies tremendously, and they have lifted half their rural population out of poverty by addressing hunger, instead of the other way around. Okay, so the question is, how long did it take me to make the film? And first of all, I should say that I didn't make it alone. I had a tremendously talented partner, Christy Jacobson, who is screening the film tonight to a group of foundations in New York City who are going to be involved in the social action campaign, so that many people will have heard of it and care about the issue by the time the film is released in March. So that's where she is tonight. It took about 3 years, from soup to nuts. It may have taken a little less time, but I gave birth twice to 2 different children at 2 different times while making the film, so that slowed us down a little bit. But we also needed that period of time for our own sort of learning curve of what was going on, and hopefully by the end of the film, you all will sort of have the larger thesis that we came to of, it's not one thing. It's not just the ag subsidies. It's not just the politicians. There's a whole sort of perfect storm of things that got us here. But fixing it doesn't require a perfect storm of things to miraculously happen. It's just simply a question of political will. And where does that come from? Frankly, that comes from you and me and everybody in this room. You guys are proof to me, because you showed up, you sat through a really long intermission that you're still sitting through. That, you know, and that to me is proof that there's some traction here. I mean, I know that the average person in Minneapolis is maybe not our average viewer. We've got some really cultured and sophisticated people who come out to something like this. But seeing a film like this and tweeting about it, liking us on Facebook, putting the word out there is gigantic. Because when we shift the zeitgeist on something, that's when change can happen. And if you look at, you know, when I started making this movie, and I would tell people I was making a movie about first world hunger, domestic hunger in the US, you could kind of see them glaze over. Either that or they didn't quite believe me. And now, when you talk about it, people listen. There's something brewing around food, and people are starting to get savvy about where their food comes from, who's growing it, how it's grown, what goes into it, how safe it is, and also who's not getting it. So I had Representative Jim McGovern, who's truly a hero. He's the guy who did the food stamp challenge. And he's one of those guys that you wish was running for president, because he's so plain spoken and real and just a great guy. And he said that he has seen his fellow legislators, if he'll take a piece of bill onto the floor and start talking to his friends in Congress about it, he's seen people change their minds about how they're going to vote because 6 people in their district called them 6. And I said, you're kidding me, right? He said, no, because they extrapolate that for every person who called, maybe 2,000 people feel the same way but didn't bother calling. So, A, it means that people who pick up the phone have disproportionate power, which might be responsible for some of the political activity we see right now on the fringes. But also, it means that we all have a really powerful role to play. If you and 5 of your friends pick up the phone and call, well, maybe your representatives are already on board here, but in communities where they may not be, and you say, I want to know how you're voting on the next child nutrition bill, or on the farm bill, where a lot of these subsidies are being decided and nutrition titles are being decided. And at the end of the film, we tell you the number to text so that you can constantly get updates, so that it's transparent, and you know what's being voted on, and you know how your senator is voting. You can go to takepart.org or .com, I don't remember which one it is, but Participant, who's our producing partner, has mounted an amazing campaign that will ultimately be, it's still in the very beginning stages, but it's going to be very local. And you'll be able to click right on your region and find out exactly what's going on and who's voting how. And then you can pick up the phone and say, hey, I want you to know my vote is going to be based on how you vote on this. And it really works. And every single legislator I met told me that, and yet nobody seems to do it. And when they feel like they need to help, they do a very noble thing, but they usually drive cans to a food pantry. It's not nearly as helpful as picking up the phone. So I'm hoping this film will galvanize people, show them that it can work, and get them inspired to do so, because it's so fixable, you know? Thank you. It's very nice of you to say. I come from a family of, I wouldn't call them activists, but certainly socially active. And there's always been a sort of ethos in my family about taking care of the world. I come from a very sort of normal, suburban, but privileged background. And I've always been very conscious of the fact that with that privilege comes a certain amount of responsibility. I was blessed to have parents that believed in me. They provided me with a great education and the tools. And it just always seemed to me that I should use that for something like this. I don't know. I'm kind of boring, to be really honest with you. I've been always very involved in different political causes. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. My husband and I talk politics 18 hours a day. It's what we love to do. The question is how we helped people be open talking about their hunger. I think it's a really good question, because we stigmatize hunger in this country, and we make people feel like they are to blame for their own misfortune. I think the flip side of that sort of very cherished American ideal that, well, if you succeed, it's because you pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps. Well, the flip side of that is that if you're failing or if you're not succeeding, it's your own personal failure on some level. But truly, I don't believe that's true. I think the game's a little rigged. It's a little fixed, you know, and a lot of people are playing by the rules and abiding by that social contract that says if you work hard and you do things the right way, you should at least be able to buy food. So I think a big part of getting people to open up was to show up and without a camera and show them that we were on their side. We weren't, you know, trying to say, oh, you know, we're going to do a show that shows how dumb you are in your food choices. It's not, you know, what, I forget the show that Jamie Oliver did, but that, you know, that was really hard for us to follow Jamie Oliver's show because people who were dealing with obesity and health issues were like, you're going to make me look stupid. But we wanted to show them that we actually thought they were doing a great job given what they were dealing with. And we just spent time with them. Typically when I go into a community that's not my community, I find that it helps a lot to have somebody bring me in who is of that community, who's really trusted. And if you can find the person who the people of a community really believe in and get that person to believe in you, people open their hearts. They really do. So in the case of Rosie's family, the Casey family, it was Pastor Bob. Pastor Bob was determined to get the word out there, about how courageous his whole community was, and the huge problem they were facing. And so he brought us in, and he was so revered and loved in his community because he was literally the thing that stood between total hunger and eking out a survival for many, many people.
Miss Lori Silverbush.